Hey, my tech guy Tim. In this video, we're going to go through the benefits of creating a PPKG file. It's a provisioning file that Microsoft offers for provisioning computers kind of out of the box, or if you're reimaging them and they're booting up kind of the first time, either again out of the box or after a fresh kind of reimage of Windows now 11. The the biggest benefits of the provisioning file is kind of bypassing a lot of that wizards when you go through a new computer setup. You don't have to pick the keyboard, connect it to the internet, force you to set up a user account or link it to like a Microsoft account, or the mechanisms to try to bypass that Microsoft is slowly starting to get rid of. So I have a pre-recorded video here that I wanted to kind of run through first. So I have the first boot screen that the computer is going to boot up to, asking for your region. If we continue through kind of this initial boot screen, it'll ask you to do the keyboard layout. Again, just kind of going through the wizard, kind of prompting you to connect to a network. Now, there are ways to get around this. So one of the ways around requiring to connect to the network or put in a local account is doing the Shift F10, or in some laptops it might require the function key, so FN Shift F10, and that will allow to be prompted with a command prompt window to be able to enter in the command to force a local account, and it will prompt load up a separate dialog box to be able to enter in a local credentials and be able to kind of bypass the creating of a email. There are some where if you unplug the network, you can try to force it to do like domain join instead, and then it'll let you set up a local profile. But overall, it's just extra steps that you could potentially bypass with a provisioning file. Here, just as a test, I'm putting in admin, kind of making up a password, putting a different username. So it even restricts you on what the username can be, where with the provisioning file, there's no restrictions. You can choose admin or whatever other name you might want to do. And then that kind of gets you in. So the process to go through all that is, there's multiple steps. So with the provisioning file, we'll dive into that, and I'll kind of show you how to create one, and then also how fast it can be for kind of setting up a new computer. So on a existing Windows computer, that is the caveat here, is that before kind of having a new computer or setting up a new computer arriving, or a batch of computers that this will work really well with, you will need to have an existing computer that you create the PPKG file, or the provisioning package file, and then that provisioning file can be used moving forward for any kind of Windows 11 computer and Windows 10, of course. But ideally, you should be on Windows 11 at this point. So in the Microsoft App Store, just search for Windows Config, and it should come up. So Windows Configuration Designer is the app that will create the file. I already have it downloaded, so I will open this up and we'll... All right, when you open up and run it, initially you'll have this kind of black box appear. You can just minimize that. That's part of the program, and kind of let that run. So now that that's minimized, here's the program. I'm going to hide my face there. Okay, so there's a lot you can dive into on creating a provisioning file. We're going to stick to the basics of just a very basic provisioning file to kind of just get you into the computer. So all right, after you click on the provision desktop devices, you'll be able to choose the name of the project. So in this case, I'm just going to call it new computer setup. And you can get specific in the name, and I'll show you a reason, some reasoning why. So we can kind of, there's different, you could create multiple provisioning files for different specific needs. And so you may want to be unique in some of the naming scheme, but for now we'll keep it generic, new computer setup, and I'm going to default it to the downloads folder. All right, so once that is saved, one caveat that I will flag when saving that file, the project name, is it does need to be in an empty folder. So even if it's in your downloads or wherever you're saving it, just create an empty folder, name that whatever you want to call that, and then you can create the project into there. Okay, so this is where we dive into creating the provisioning file and what you want to apply. So with the setup device, you could choose to kind of pick a name for it. You could enter product keys and remove pre-installed software. So there is a lot that you can do within these settings. But again, I'm going to keep it very basic. I'm going to let it default to whatever name it wants. Network wise, I'm not going to do any Wi-Fi, but this feature is really cool because you could basically link it. You could have a PPKG file that's unique to a computer going to someone's house directly, and whatever the scenario is, they had to unbox it and boot it up. They could plug in a USB that has a PPKG provisioning file on it that has their already linked to their Wi-Fi with their SSID information, and it just connects them to their login screen, connects to the network, and then you can even have it check into like a RMM tool and start onboarding the computer remotely. So there's a lot of mechanisms here that you can kind of play around with, but this computer is just going to be wired in, so I'm going to turn that off. Account management. So this is the main critical part related to what we were doing earlier in the video. So in this case, I mean, you can do some Active Directory, Azure. I want to do just local. So I'm just going to create a local account called admin, and I'm going to create an admin as the password. So very basic, obviously not something that I would keep for long term, but at least lets me have some kind of password on the machine. And you obviously don't want to forget this, otherwise you will have to kind of recreate this PPKG file and start all over again. So we're going to do admin, and then you can hit next down here or the bubble. So I'll do a next down there. The application, again, we're going to skip this. I'm looking at very basics, but this is where from like a managed service provider on the IT side where I work, we will use a PPKG file to install an RMM tool essentially, so that it will deploy to the computers and check it in once it's on the network. So it's a nice easy way to bypass that kind of wizard screen, having to do any extra steps, get it to a logon screen, assuming it's plugged into the wired network, which most of the time it is during the setup process. It will check into our tools, and then we'll kick off some onboarding and push out some applications over the internet. So definitely some cool features you can do with different apps you want to just deploy by default. Nothing with certificates that we're going to do there. And then we're in the wrap up process here. So this kind of gives you a summary of wired connection, the admin account, applications, protect your package, protect your package. So this is if you wanted to basically password protect the PPKG file. So in this case, I'm going to leave that off. I did want to jump back to, so this is a good example where it's not a green check. So the computer name is actually required. So in this case, I'm just going to name it the serial number. So we'll do that. That's fine. So the remove, so this is a nice feature as well that I want to go back to. This essentially will reset the machine, like doing a Windows 11 kind of full reset and kind of put it back to its standard. Now, if the image on the machine came from Dell or Lenovo and it had like McAfee is a big thing that's usually pre-installed, then odds are it's resetting to the image that is on the machine, which would still include McAfee. So there are some things that it's still going to revert back to, but that's where it can go back to the application side, where you install certain things that then checks it into your tool and then remove it. Or probably the best scenario would be to just do a clean image and boot it from a Windows 11 bootable USB, which we will go through that scenario here as well. All right, so we're back to the wrap up screen. I'm not going to do a password to protect this. I can see the basics information there. You're ready to create your package. We will create. So this is the location as to where it saved the file. Some of this I'm going to block out, but overall it's in this MTGT, my tech guy Tim provisioning package file there. So I can click on that, and that will open up a file explorer. All right, so within the file explorer where it saves these files, there are kind of a bunch of files that get saved. The one that really matters is going to be the new computer setup. So if you do keep these, then you could open this back up and make edits to this same section, and that's why it is in its own kind of folder by itself. But this PPKG file is going to be the one you want. So what I'll do here is new computer setup, and I'll do -admin. So I know that it's the admin account that I had created. And a lot of times if I did add like a program or like an SSID wireless connection to a specific home network, I would make maybe some kind of notation in the file name. I don't want to make it too long, but some kind of notation that would remind me that this file is specific to like a person directly versus this one being more generic for more widespread use. So I'll add that there. And now we just need to add that to our USB flash drive. So when it comes to a provisioning file, it has to be at the root of a flash drive for one. It can't be in any subfolders. And you could have other data on the flash drive. There's no issues with other files being on the flash drive. You don't have to wipe it or anything. But if you are using a flash drive that is preloaded with like a bootable Windows 11 image, then that's probably the best scenario. Is you create the flash drive that's Windows 11 bootable, and then you add the PPKG file after the fact, because obviously when you're creating the Windows 11 bootable flash drive, you have to wipe the drive during that process. So let me get this drive plugged in, and we'll transfer this file over. All right, so I copied over the new computer setup -admin PPKG file. This is a Windows bootable flash drive. So these are all the bootable, already pre-configured, pre-created. And I mean, that's just using the Windows 11 kind of media creation tool to make this a bootable flash drive. So that will wipe the drive originally, load these files, and then I can go ahead and add another file back on. So I do actually have a desktop device -admin PPKG file, so I will delete that, because in this you don't want to have more than one. I think it will prompt you, so it is smart enough to like prompt you and you can kind of pick, but the better bet is just to have one provisioning file on the flash drive to be safe. All right, so we're going to eject this, plug it into our micro Dell desktop that we have to kind of test with, and we'll run through the booting of the flash drive and see how the PPKG file interacts with it. All right, we're going to boot off of this micro. I do love these micro PCs, just because they're very, if I can get this up here. They're very kind of small in size, very easy to work with. So we're going to, I do have another video coming on how we use these micro PCs for kind of, we deploy them to all our client locations. We set up some BIOS settings to make them so they don't kind of go to sleep at all. And there are like ways to connect to them remotely and power them up if they do fall asleep or get powered off and stuff like that. So another video coming for that. But right now we're about to boot off this USB that's plugged into the back of this and then see how the provisioning file goes from there. All right, every different machines will have a different kind of get to the BIOS option. So I'm doing F12 for this Dell Micro. And that got us into the BIOS. Okay, so I want to boot off the USB. That's going to be this PNY. Okay, so we're at the boot screen. Let's go ahead and next. So I agree. So I'm installing. I'm going to wipe the machine, get it, basically start it from scratch. Accept. Okay, so the per disk 1 is the USB drive, so I'm going to ignore that. All the other disk, we're going to just delete the partition. So we have one unallocated space, single disk 0 drive. So delete that. And delete that. Okay, so one drive, a 256 hard drive with 238, I guess, usable. So we will next on that. Again, nothing special about this, nothing related to the provisioning file. We're just kind of booting off the loading Windows 11 fresh. So we'll let this run, and then once we get to the boot screen after the Windows 11 loads, then we'll see how all that proceeds. All right, so as this machine boots up, there's kind of two scenarios you can think about. So obviously in this scenario, we reimage the machine. So it's going through some extra steps because we wiped it clean. But you can also think of this as if you had just unboxed a new computer, you're not going to reimage it and just use the image the computer came with. You're just plugging in the USB drive before you boot up the computer for the first time. And that's where the provisioning file will kick in that we'll see in a moment here. So once this finishes, just keep that in mind, that the two scenarios. You have the one scenario being that, yes, we reimaged it, but now it's the same as if we're pulling it out of the box for the first time and booting it up as a new computer. That's the scenario we're going into after the reimage as well. Let's wrap up and then we'll see what the provisioning file does. All right, the computer's coming up. It does all happen pretty quick. That can be an advantage of the encrypting the file because it will prompt you to do a password. But in this case, it's going to recognize that there's a provisioning file right away. If there is a chance that it doesn't, so right there it paused for a moment, but then it recognized. If it doesn't recognize it, you can hit the Windows key 5 times. And then you can point it to a provisioning file. But in this case, it found it and it's applying. We'll let it keep doing its thing. So we didn't have to pick the region, pick a keyboard, type in a command to bypass and do a local account. It automatically loaded up, recognized they were provisioning file, had a little bit of an extra screen, and then it's rebooting to apply some of the computer name change and apply some of the other settings. And then after this next boot, we'll be right at a login screen ready to sign in with that admin account that we created. All right, so created local account applied, applied policies, set change, And now we're at a login screen. So something different that you might not usually see is that it says setup completed successfully, because that's the mechanism for applying the provisioning package. Now when we'll see the admin account and we had set that as just admin, we'll go ahead and sign in. So out of the first boot scenario, plugging it, having the provisioning file like already created on a USB drive, you plug it in, boot up the computer for the first time, walk away for 5 minutes for it to go through the cycle, reboot, apply the settings, and not even 5 minutes. I mean, that was very fast to apply that. And then we're already signing into the computer. And here we can just click. Obviously you can choose whatever settings you want to apply there. I'm just going to leave the defaults. And now we're logged in. And we can see if we look at system settings here, it applied the serial number, and it's an Optiplex 77 or 7070. And the machine's ready to go. So base install Reimage with Windows 11 with the provisioning package applied. I hope this video was helpful in how a PPKG provisioning file can really help in regards to setting up computers. Even if you don't set up computers often, just having a quick way to have a local account and not be forced to do anything. I don't see Microsoft eliminating this provisioning file package to do a local account. I mean, it's been around for quite a while, and it's a lot of IT managers will do features like this. Looks like the computer's updating drivers after this clean install, but stay tuned for the next video coming up on how we use the micros for deploying to offices and using those as test machines, and some of the BIOS settings we changed. I think it's pretty cool features that you can kind of apply to some of these micro PCs. But till next time, my tech guy Tim. Thank you.